Have you noticed the anxiety that creeps in whenever the weather department forecasts a storm? Well, it's inevitable because we've witnessed the destructions of storms in the past. Today, even moderate storms can produce high volumes of floods with intense erosive power. Why is that? Is it because our climate is changing and that we're receiving intense rainfall? Well, sure, to a certain extent. Climate research dates back a few decades ago, and the research has proven that our climate is indeed changing and that we are indeed receiving more rainfall. But climate change alone doesn't answer the question. Climate change is only a piece of the puzzle. In fact, more recently, climate change is being used as a scapegoat for so many crises we humans have brought upon ourselves, such as flooding. Which leaves me wondering, how many lives need to be lost? How many people need to be displaced as climate refugees? And how much property and infrastructure needs to be destroyed for humans to realize that the manner in which we are using our land is what's causing these merciless floods, which we read about every single year? Upon scrutiny, it doesn't take much to see that these merciless floods are man-made. Flooding occurs in two ways: river flooding, whereby the water levels exceed the bank of the river and spread out onto surrounding land. And the second is when low-lying areas are submerged underwater. And both these manners of flooding awakened in me an urge to investigate flooding from an alternative lens as opposed to that offered by climate change. As I traveled to work, I crossed two of Eswatini's rivers, the Great Usutu River and the Mkonvo River. And I observed that after every storm, both these rivers would end up flooding, regardless of the duration of the storm, whether it was short or it was long. And not just these rivers only, rivers all across Eswatini would always end up in flood. The ferocious waves of the water would crash against the surrounding land, demonstrating the high speed at which the water is traveling as well as its sheer force. And the brown-red color of the water signified the high soil content level in the water. And sure enough, every time the water levels would die down and the velocity of the water dissipates, the bottom of the river would be left exposed with enormous soil deposits. And this sounded alarms in my head because it amplified the magnitude of land degradation. And as an ecologist, I've always been aware that our natural landscape is deteriorating at an alarming rate and that humans are the major driving force behind all of this. But being confronted by these vivid images on a regular basis cemented the fact that there's still a lot of advocacy work to be done to bring about issues of this nature to the forefront. You see, the river flooding even after a short storm, a storm that doesn't even last 6 hours, indicates that our land has lost its ability to infiltrate and soak rainwater. Rainwater which once nourished the earth, rainwater which hydrated our crops in the field, rainwater which quenched the thirst of our livestock, is now lost to the ocean within a couple of days, and we are not doing anything about it. Not only are we losing the water, but we are also losing precious soil particles which are dislodged and carried with the surface runoff in a process called soil erosion. And the accelerated rate of erosion we're witnessing today bears testament to the fact that our soils are poor. They are not healthy. A healthy soil should contain an abundance of life. It should contain bacteria, fungi, pseudoscorpions, springtails, woodlice, termites, booklice, imisundvu, earthworms. But our soils do not have that. When was the last time you saw an earthworm in the soil? It's been a while. A healthy soil should also contain organic matter, which plays a very crucial role in binding soil particles together, maintaining the soil structure of the soil so that that soil is able to absorb and retain water. But poor soils poorly absorb rainwater. And this is why rainwater remains on the surface long enough to become surface runoff, which then accumulates and therefore causes floods. And the soil erosion we are witnessing results in the formation of gullies. And gullies are these deep incisions which are carved out onto the land by this erosive runoff. And everywhere you look in Eswatini, there are gullies, tinvonga, everywhere you look. And it's further confirmation that our soils are in poor condition. Okay, so we've established that our soils are not healthy. But another factor worth noting is the fact that our land lacks natural vegetation, which would have been our first line of defense against flooding. How so? You see, the branches and leaves of plants help with intercepting rainwater, which causes that rainwater to slow down, giving it enough time to soak into the soil. And then deep-rooted indigenous vegetation helps with absorbing rainwater and disperses it so that it spreads out onto greater surface area and has enough time to soak into the soil. And then there are wetlands, ematete in Siswati. Wetlands are naturally occurring ecosystems which provide the benefit of flood control. They retain excess water. And we'd be benefiting from all these ecosystem services I've just mentioned if we had our natural vegetation intact, which unfortunately we don't. In our pursuit for civilization, humans have greatly changed the landscape to suit our economic and social needs. We've converted natural vegetation into cropland, into mines for mineral extraction, into human settlement and urban areas, and all these alterations we've done to our land have compromised the land's ability to soak rainwater. I think, in my opinion, the worst of all these alterations is the use of impermeable surfaces on the land, such as tarred roads and concrete pavings, to cover our land in urban areas. Not only are we replacing natural vegetation with a foreign material altogether, but we are denying rainwater the slightest opportunity of even soaking into the soil. And you know what we've done instead? We have engineered these intricate stormwater drainage systems which are meant to swiftly whisk water away to the nearest river. A poor maintenance of these systems, as well as litter and plant debris, blocks and prevents these systems from being effective, which results in the water remaining on the tarred surface, accumulating and therefore causing floods. In cities, flooding is more likely to occur than it is in a rural area, with both these localities receiving the same amount of flooding. And in some cases, development in urban areas takes place on fragile ecosystems such as the wetland. And when you begin to construct on a wetland, you change the soil morphology altogether and you interfere with the wetland's properties of retaining excess water. And a case in point is the flooding of the Mbabane Plaza. These images were taken during Cyclone Eloise in 2021. But there's a number of reasons why the plaza floods, and this plaza is situated in the capital city of Eswatini, Mbabane. So the first reason why this plaza flood is because it was built on the floodplains of a river. And so the surrounding land slopes towards the river, and every time it rains, naturally the water gravitates towards the river. Secondly, because we've used tarmac on our land, the water really doesn't have anywhere else to go but flow downslope towards the river. And thirdly, but most importantly, which I really want you guys to take note of, is the fact that we have built over our wetland, a wetland which is found upstream of this river, which stretches for about 1 kilometer between Mbabane Central High School and Cooper Center. And because we've built over that wetland, we've changed the soil morphology and we have interfered with its ability to retain water. So what happens is every time it rains, instead of that wetland storing the water and releasing it into the river steadily, it just gushes over and goes into the river with full steam, which then results in flooding of the plaza. Another case study I want us to take a closer look at is the impacts of Tropical Cyclone Idai in Mozambique when the tropical cyclone made landfall in 2019. It is clear that the extent of flooding is directly related to the amount of natural forest area remaining on the land. And in these images, you can see images that were taken between 2000 and 2019. You can actually see a shrinkage, a drastic decline in the amount of natural forest cover on the land, and it's represented by pink. So in 2001, you can see there's quite a lot of pink, which means there was a lot of natural forest areas. And as the years go by to 2018 and 2019, there's such a huge difference. And it's worse in 2021. You can barely see the pink. You can imagine how it is now. And these areas with very little natural forest remaining were the ones which were the worst hit by Tropical Cyclone Idai. 4 years later, and Mozambique has still not managed to rebuild and restore everything which was lost during these tropical cyclones. Global temperatures are expected to increase, and with the increase of global temperatures, that means the surface temperature of the ocean is also expected to increase. And once the surface temperature of the ocean crosses a threshold of 27 degrees Celsius, it provides the ideal conditions for the formation of tropical cyclone clouds. What does this mean? This means that we're going to be receiving an increase in the frequency of tropical cyclones. This begs the question, are we really prepared to deal with the aftermath of these storms? Will our economies be able to sustain the devastation? But most importantly, is our land going to be able to absorb all the rainwater and protect us from flooding? If we continue with business as usual, the future does not look great. But if we all work together to conserve the remaining patches of natural landscape, as well as rehabilitate natural land which has been previously degraded, we can have a future. You see, by viewing flooding as a consequence of poor land management practices, we are able to break the science down into sizable chunks which can be understood by a lay audience. Humans have coexisted with nature for the longest time, and because of this coexistence, we know how to take care of nature. We've done so before. Indigenous knowledge of the natural landscape is engraved in our DNA. We pass it down from one generation to the next. And so getting the help of the public to participate in landscape rehabilitation efforts can be achievable. Our forefathers respected the land. They respected Mother Nature and all her provisions, and they understood that in order for them to continue surviving, they'd have to take care of nature. They practiced sustainable harvesting of natural resources, and back then, firewood was their main source of fuel for cooking. But surprisingly enough, their forests were in much better conditions than the forests we have today, with us using electricity. And their forests remained intact because they only harvested dry trees, and the wet trees were left untouched for continued growth of the forest. Contrary to what we're doing today, we are harvesting wet trees. They cultivated their land with indigenous seeds just by seed scattering, eliminating the need for tillage. They intercropped indigenous maize with vines and legumes. And they didn't need to use synthetic chemicals because the soils had all the minerals that their crops needed to grow. And because there was very little disturbance to the soil ecosystem, those soils were incredibly healthy and they absorbed rainwater. And wetlands were treated with the utmost respect. The chief would be the only authoritative voice which would give a call to the residents to start harvesting from the wetlands. It wasn't harvesting just willy-nilly as what we're seeing today. And back then, livestock was herded. And so the shepherd would make sure that the livestock doesn't enter the wetland. By so doing, preserving that wetland, which could provide the benefit of flood control. We can go back to this manner of life. We've done so before. for hundreds of years. We just need to tap back into our innate behavior. We need to speak up for the land and speak up when there is proposed developments which threaten to compromise the integrity of the land. And we can do this by participating in scoping exercises, as well as submitting our comments to the Eswatini Environment Authority whenever invited to do so. In this image, we have a statement that was issued by the Eswatini Environment Authority, whereby they invite the general public to submit their comments on a proposed development at Engabanen. The public is advised on where to obtain the environmental and social impact assessment document so as to make informed comments. We have all these avenues which we have to protect the environment, but we're just not utilizing it. We can also create green spaces in cities, which will serve the role of allowing rainwater to absorb into the soil. And we can adopt a model by a Kenyan organization called the Public Spaces Network, which runs an annual competition called the Changing Faces Competition, whereby they challenge their citizens to transform negative spaces of the city into more positive spaces. In these images, we have before and after images of negative spaces in Nairobi which were transformed. And we can do this in Eswatini as well. And ask the citizens to transform these spaces into green spaces, which include rain gardens and swales, which will serve the role of getting the rainwater into the soil. Or we can create urban food forests, the same way Ron Finley is doing in South Central Los Angeles in the United States of America. We can also create water retention ponds, which again serve as a rainwater harvesting technique. And if we manage to get the soil into the ground, there's a wealth of so many other benefits we're going to receive. The land will constantly be hydrated, and it will manage to support plant life even during dry spells. And the water that does enter the soil will trickle down to the belly of the earth, and it will recharge groundwater. That means it will provide a steady supply of fresh water into rivers and springs. And just like that, we can achieve water security just by restoring our land. There'll be so much moisture in the land and in plants that it will release water vapor into the atmosphere, reducing atmospheric temperatures. Now stay with me. Every time you enter a natural forest, it's relatively cooler than outside, right? And that's because of the cooling effect of water vapor. So we can reduce atmospheric temperatures just by restoring our land. And this water vapor will reach the upper levels of the atmosphere. It will condense to form rain clouds, and it will rain once more. And that means we will shorten the periods of drought. Drought which has plagued us for so long. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, we have the power to influence our local climate in the palm of our hands by getting the water into the soil instead of rejecting it and allowing it to go into the ocean. We are healing our broken water cycle. We no longer have to wait on parliamentarians to decide the fate of our climate, which is an opportunity which isn't afforded by the climate change narrative. You see, the climate change narrative involves abstract things such as greenhouse gas emissions, which are complex to explain to a lay audience. It is also dominated by corporate giants, and it waxes and wanes with political and economic cycles, which in itself are complex to explain. This then leaves the people that are on the front lines of climate change, it leaves them feeling powerless. It leaves them feeling like the world is over, when a better world is possible. Let us choose hope. Thank you.